Welcome to Reframing Me. I'm your host, Dr. Jennifer Brubaker. In this special 6-part series, Reframing the Conversation, we're exploring one of the most complex issues that families face today: communicating across political divides. In a world that's increasingly polarized, these divides can take a toll on our relationships. But with the right knowledge and strategies, we can reconnect. In this series, we'll explore the psychology of political polarization, we'll address how we have gotten to this point, and we'll find strategies for how we can have healthier conversations. Together, we'll reframe the way that we approach these challenging discussions and complicated relationships, focusing on empathy, active listening, and finding common ground. So get ready to shift your perspective and reframe the way that you handle family and political discourse. Hey guys, it's Jen. This is the first episode of a special 6-part series of Reframing Me called Reframing the Conversation. If you have been with me for a minute, you know that I am a communication studies professor at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington, where I have been teaching and researching now for the last 18 years. Obviously, a primary focus and interest area of mine is family communication. And in the podcast, we typically talk about the various issues that families with teenagers face. But really, we specifically have important conversations about being a mom of teenagers and what that actually means and includes, because it's all a totally new game once our kids reach their teens. Well, without getting too sidetracked with that, what you may not know about me is that an area that I have also specialized in over the years, whether it's through my teaching and course development or my research and my writing, is political communication. I published my first book in 2020 called Celebrity and the American Political Process. We have a huge issue in this country right now. And as someone who is literally an expert in both family and political communication, which I will hazard a guess that there are very few of us out there, because it's actually kind of a weird combination, right? But although it's a random combination of areas of expertise, it does put me in a really unique position to help you and help the people that you care about. Over the last 25 years that I have been studying communication, the world has changed. I mean, it has changed so much. The media environment, social media in and of itself, right? Technology, our access to information, the instantaneous news cycle, the political and social environments. It's always been the case that generations face different opportunities and different challenges than previous ones. But the differences we are all facing in the world today, the world we are living in, the world that we are raising our children in, the world that we are caring for our parents in, it is an entirely new and challenging environment than the one that we grew up in or that our parents faced raising us. And that can make communication really difficult sometimes. In the last number of years, I hear from so many people who have experienced a profound sense of loss and sadness. It's that ambiguous loss that we've talked about in the past, because they have lost loved ones, and it's not physically lost, but they feel like they've lost them emotionally. They feel as if they've lost these family members to an atmosphere of hatred and hostility and anger and judgment that characterizes much of today's political discourse. And this sense of loss is intensified by feeling that family members or friends have become what we refer to as political absolutists, which means that they have adopted this very rigid mentality, like the world is only black or white. There's no gray area. And that mentality leaves very little room for any discussion or disagreement. This "you're either with me or against me" mindset is very frequently then reinforced by media narratives that we see that totally thrive on more conflict and more division. And then that just further deepens the divisions within our families and our communities. Families are being broken more and more by today's politics than ever before. In the past, there's often been a don't talk politics or religion kind of mentality, which really is saying don't question the dominant perspective. Well, today's shift away from avoiding political discussions and questioning the dominant perspective in families has had definite impacts. On the one hand, it has totally led to more open and honest communication about important issues, which is great because it has allowed family members to feel empathy and to better understand each other's values and beliefs. And we all know that that can create a much deeper connection between people, and it can build a mutual respect between them. But that only works when it's managed well, which, as you can probably guess, it's often not. So the downside has been an increase in family conflict because political polarization has made these discussions much more contentious. And so, in many cases, these political disagreements have led to strained relationships, and some families have even experienced long-term divides. The intensity of modern political discourse in general, and we certainly can't ignore how it's been amplified by the media and social media. But this has made it harder for people to separate their political beliefs from their personal identity and to separate others' political beliefs from their personal identities, which has led to more emotionally charged conversations. So that and the erosion of the social norm about discussing politics, which I don't think is a bad thing. The problem is more that the norm went away without people really understanding the how of effective communication about these sensitive topics. So what's happened, of course, is that all of this has contributed to an overall decline in the civility of public discourse. So, what were once like private matters discussed only with caution and really probably with a fair understanding of what the other person's perspectives were on the topics, instead now it has become a frequent source of public and private conflict that affects not just family relationships, but also the broader social fabric. Part of this has been a trend of attributing characteristics and values and morals to people solely based on their political affiliation. We call this political tribalism or political identity, and it reflects a severely deepening polarization within our society, where we see political beliefs not only as differences in opinion, but as indicators of a person's overall character and their moral worth. Many times over the last 25 years, I know my husband and I have disagreed about something political. In fact, probably more often than not, if I'm being honest. But we've been happily married for 25 years because we have the overall same values and morals. And I know that we are not the only ones for sure. I could name numerous couples just that I know personally who are exactly the same as we are. Yet, when I ask my college students if they would be friends with, let alone date, let alone marry someone of the opposite political party, their response is a very strong no way. And it is because that they truly, and both sides, I should add, but they very much believe, for the most part, they believe that there is something categorically wrong morally with opposing sides' supporters. They believe that their values are so different that they could never be friends and definitely not marry. So this trend has been made worse by the role of this ego involvement because people's political identities have become so closely tied to their self-concept and their sense of belonging. In fact, political affiliation has really increasingly become a primary marker of personal identity, and it shapes how people view themselves and how they view others. So we attribute really broad, sweeping characteristics to people simply because they're a Democrat or they're a Republican. I mean, even so far as not just politically misguided, but like they are morally inferior or less intelligent or unpatriotic. And this shift from viewing politics as being an area of policy disagreement to instead being a battleground of moral and ethical superiority, this has huge implications for how people interact with one another in both public and in their private lives. So, when basic political affiliation is used as this shortcut to judge someone's character, it really deepens our societal divisions. The primary outcome is that people are more likely to segregate themselves into homogeneous groups. They create echo chambers where their beliefs are constantly reinforced, and they are much less likely to interact with others who have different views. But this also means that they won't be exposed to understanding them and understanding their why they feel as they do, why they believe what they do. And this tendency to attribute negative characteristics to the other side, it only reinforces what we call a confirmation bias. That means that people seek out information that confirms their beliefs, and they avoid or they dismiss any information that challenges those beliefs. And the outcome of this, of course, is that it only further entrenches their views. And so they end up creating echo chambers because they end up in these homogeneous groups. They end up only hearing perspectives that just reinforce their existing beliefs. And then that leads to a distorted understanding of people who are on, quote unquote, the other side. And as political beliefs become tied more to moral judgments, civil discourse itself deteriorates. Conversations are less about understanding, and they're more about defending someone's own identity while attacking the other person's. This erosion of civility makes it harder to find common ground or to reach compromises on important issues. And then within families and communities and personal relationships, this trend can lead to increased conflict. Because when people judge each other's character based on their political beliefs, it can strain or even sever those relationships. Basic family gatherings and social events and even casual conversations become like potential minefields where any political discussion can quickly turn into a very personal attack. People are complex, and yet this trend reduces the complexity of people to simple stereotypes based on their political affiliation. And so instead of recognizing that, hey, people can actually hold like a wide range of beliefs and values, and they all may not fit so neatly into a political category. Instead, people are often judged solely based on their perceived political identity, totally overlooking any type of nuance of human thought or experience, which again leads to more misunderstandings and further division. Okay, so let's establish from the beginning that neither negativity in politics nor partisanship is new, not at all. But over the last 20-ish years, and especially the last 5 to 10 years, what we have seen is a rise in political dissension and polarization societally, which has spilled over into our families. We have seen very uncivil political discourse that has deeply impacted and damaged many families. But we'll get into why it's so much worse than it has been in the past. But I don't want anyone thinking I'm coming after them or coming after their political party. So I want to establish also very early on that I am a social scientist. This means that I study people. I study societies and mainly the relationships among people in these societies. In my classrooms and in my research and here in this podcast, my job, my goal is not to teach you about politics. That is for the political scientists and the social study teachers out there. And most importantly, my job is definitely not. I am not here to teach you about my politics and about my political views. My job, my purpose here and in the classroom is to teach you how to communicate with others about politics, which is especially important when their political perspectives are different from your political perspectives. So, what am I going to do? Well, in part 2 of the series, I will help you understand how we got here, our current state of political dissension. So, we'll talk about the role of media in forming your opinions, as well as the role that it may have played in others' opinions. And we'll talk about how we got here in politics and how much may not be all that different than it was in the past. But obviously, something is different, right? Well, I'll give you a hint. 5 letters, starts with an and ends with an idia. It's today's media environment. In part 3, we'll explore how to understand some key pieces of how we become who we are politically and how we evolve politically ourselves over our lives through a process called political socialization. And we'll talk about the important role that media literacy has in all of that. And then in part 4, we'll get to the how do we do this? How can we effectively communicate about politics? How do we have healthy political discourse? I'll give you strategies and tips for how you can put it to use in your families and in your relationships. But wait, Jen, you may be saying, yes, I can totally communicate with people who have a different perspective, but this isn't that. This is extremism. They are an extremist. This isn't a we disagree on tax policy kind of thing. This is more of a we disagree on basic human rights, or they know that that's a lie and they just don't seem to care. I can't communicate with that, Jen. Okay, I totally get that completely. We are living in a very complex society right now. But that complex society has infiltrated into many of our families, and that's super hard to just walk away from. It's hard to say, I just can't. So, part 5, y'all, that's where we're going to talk about political extremists, how and why they got this way, and most importantly, how we can communicate with them and ideally maintain a relationship. And then in part 6, we'll get into a conversation about how to repair relationships that have been damaged due to conflicts resulting from political differences. I truly believe that this is so very, very important. These are valuable conversations for us to have because improving communication about politics is crucial to both democracy and preserving and repairing our familial relationships. If we can foster an environment where differing opinions can be expressed without the fear of ridicule or hostility, families can begin to bridge these gaps that have formed. So at this point, you may be wondering how we even got here. How did we get to the point that we are turning on our loved ones? That's what we'll have our conversation about in part 2. We'll look historically, how has politics reached this point? And we'll talk about the role of the media and social media, media literacy. But psychologically, there are a couple of factors that do play a big role. Factors that even allow the media or the world to impact us. We, like the collective we are drawn to negativity. We have both a negativity bias and a confirmation bias. This means that we are drawn to and influenced by negative information, and we are constantly looking for information to confirm these thoughts. So, negativity bias refers to a psychological phenomenon that people are more strongly influenced by negative information than by positive information. Now, in the past, in like our evolutionary past, we needed this. We needed this because our literal survival was dependent on our ability to be attuned to the negative, to potential threats and dangers. So, as a result of that, when we see negative events or we feel negative emotions or see negative information, that negativity tends to have more of a significant impact on our thoughts and our behaviors than if we were to encounter positivity. When we're consuming political information and media coverage, this negativity bias means that we're more likely to pay attention to and to remember negative news stories or political attacks or basically any negative or divisive political rhetoric. Obviously, I am not the only one who knows this, right? Not a secret. Politicians and media outlets are also quite aware of this negativity bias. And so they love to exploit it by focusing on scandals and conflicts and any type of negativity or criticism because they know that it will capture and maintain their audience's attention. I mean, we all do this all the time in our everyday lives. We can be sweet and kind and patient. We can do everything for our families without any issue for like 100 days. But yet we lose it just once and we get, why are you always so mad? Or you're always upset. Or just like mom always goes crazy about things. Really? That's what you remember despite the other 100 days that I was sweet and kind and patient and doing everything for you? Drawn to the negative. And my students, it doesn't matter how many positive comments I give them on their papers. If I write anything negative or constructive, I am so harsh. But I totally get it. I can have a class of 25, 24 who are fine with me and one who is angry. I'd assume from the harsh feedback. But that one angry student writes negative feedback of me, and I become obsessed with that one, right? It doesn't matter that the others are positive. I only remember the negative. We all do this. It's natural. But the problem is that this focus on negativity creates a distorted view of reality, where the world seems to be more threatening and more divided than it might actually be, which only further fuels the polarization. And then confirmation bias, it's the tendency for us to search for and to interpret and to remember information that confirms our pre-existing beliefs while also ignoring or dismissing any information that contradicts these beliefs. This bias causes us to just reinforce our existing attitudes and opinions. We hear what we want to hear. And that makes it really difficult for us to change our views, even when we are presented with new evidence. So, like in politics, confirmation bias leads us to only set out to consume news and information that aligns with our existing political beliefs. Things like we'll go through certain media outlets or social media networks that we know are going to align with our perspective. But all this does is reinforce our partisan identities and deepen the divide between groups because we all just become more and more entrenched in our views and less open to any other perspectives. And then this confirmation bias contributes to the polarization in our families and in our communities because everyone is just gravitating towards the information that validates their beliefs instead of recognizing what else is out there. And that leads to conflicts with those on the other side. And the media. Oh, the media. The rise of the internet and the creation and growth of social media and the proliferation of, quote, fake news, these have all played a central role in intensifying political polarization in the United States. We have more information available to us than at any other point, and yet we are, like as a collective, of course, but as a collective, we are somewhat horribly uninformed. And even worse, we are often misinformed. The contentious 2000 election, the divisive aftermath of 9/11, and the Iraq War, all of these events played out as the internet was really just starting to boom, right? Social media's growth, the 2016 election, and recently we have lived through what has been referred to now as the Great American Trauma, which refers to the 2020 presidential election, the insurrection on January 6th, and COVID-19 pandemic. All of this has contributed to a political landscape that is marked by very deep divisions. And this has not only influenced national politics, but it has spilled over into our personal relationships, particularly within families. Political disagreements that might have once been managed with civility have instead become sources of intense conflict, leading to fractured relationships and a more divided society. Very, very simply put, the rise of social media and the 24-hour news cycle over the past decades, taking advantage of our natural inclination towards negativity bias and confirmation bias, and all of this playing out on the backdrop of the 2020 election and COVID, political polarization has been heightened, and it has been made increasingly difficult for people to engage in respectful conversations, especially with those who hold different views. And this uncivil political discourse has deeply impacted and damaged so many families. It's led to strained relationships because disagreements over politics have then escalated into personal attacks and resulted in divisions that are very difficult to mend. In many cases, these disagreements have caused family members to distance themselves from one another and have created divisions that go beyond just like the dinner table and has instead affected the overall family dynamics. Like these heated discussions during family gatherings, or even the very simple act of attributing something to family members based on their political views, they can all leave lasting emotional scars and lead to long-term estrangement, especially when someone feels that their core values or their identity is being attacked. It can make reconciliation challenging. But I do believe that we can do it. It's going to involve a lot of the ideas that we've talked about with other topics, but we are going to need to look at how they fit in here. Things like active listening and empathy and a commitment to understanding the other person, the idea of trying to understand over wanting to win an argument. If our families can prioritize respect and prioritize understanding over worrying about being right, we can create a space where open dialogue can occur. And that dialogue can lead to deeper connections and mutual respect despite our differences in opinion. And yes, I get it. Some families are not going to be easy. And some, not at all, unfortunately. But that doesn't mean the relationship needs to be ended or damaged or that it can't be somewhat repaired. So, y'all, that's what we're doing here. In this politically charged world, in this presidential election season, we're going to go on this journey together. Both U.S. political parties like to preach family values. So I'm pretty sure that the importance of prioritizing family is something that everyone can agree on. And I'm an actual social scientist, so I'm saying that totally objectively and factually. Thank you for being here with me today. Thank you for recognizing the importance of this material, of this journey. Thank you for always being here with me. If you are new to our community, welcome. We do this kind of conversation regularly, and there are a lot of family topics: raising teens, rediscovering who we are beyond the frame of motherhood. So go on back, do a deep dive, but also come back for the next Reframing the Conversation episode, because we're going to have a conversation about how we got here. We'll look at the role of media in forming your opinions, as well as the role it may have played in others' opinions. For new episode drops and more information about Reframing the Conversation, go to my new website, www.jenniferbrubaker.com. Also, find me on socials at Reframing Me always and everywhere, but now also at Reframing the Conversation. Until next time, be well and communicate.